The art of looking. Well, we've got to make a distinction in our own experience between thinking and what I call looking. When you are writing, you are really looking into your own feelings. You are not thinking. You are not looking into your head. Thinking is associated with memory reference. Looking is now. You look into your body when you are being creative. You're looking into your own sensation, your own feeling, because that's where your creativity comes from, the feeling of yourself. A writer or any artist is into the feeling of himself, whether he knows it or not, and he's reading it. An idea comes up into the stillness. Any artist is really meditative. He's gone still. He's learnt the process of waiting for the ideas to come up. He's reading himself. He's reading his own feeling. That, his creativity, gives him the general theme of what he's doing, and within that ideas come up, a new idea or a new twist. He'll be following a theme and some new idea comes in. He is inwardly reading himself, and he is always poised, waiting. Is that not the process? An idea just comes. Walking along the road, one could say to oneself, I'm just walking. Then an idea might come which is a good idea. But it just comes, doesn't it? You don't think about it. Right. Then, when the idea comes, you look at its application. You go still. The idea comes. The being puts it against the background of its application. I mean, if it's about how to make a motor car, it's not going to come up against the background of the sea. You don't have to do anything. The consciousness, which is the body, puts the idea on some sort of background of knowledge or application. Then you look at it against that background. You've got a canvas, and the idea against it. The process is one of looking. You only think when you go into the memory. So you might start thinking by trying to see how the idea links up with something in the past. But basically, creativity is not the action of going into memory. It's putting an idea against a general experience which you hold in your being, and then seeing its application. It's done now. It's not done by looking into the past. If it is done by looking into the past, then it is not really creative. It will be a repetition of something. It won't be unique, won't be beautiful. The art of being. The distinction between feelings and sensation is like the difference between artfulness and art. The spiritual teacher's job is to help you make the distinction in your own body. Self-knowledge is getting to know your feelings, discovering the harmonics of your personal keyboard. But more important, it is knowing the difference between the changeable personal feelings, which always refer to something in the past or future, and the sensation in the ground of being, which is always present, like now. From what I've been saying, it can be seen that art is at its finest in each of us before it differentiates into art forms, appreciation, personal interests or enthusiasms. In other words, while it remains at the level of sensation. Here is the being that you must eventually discover in all its power and potential. Is that being, your being, the only being? Could it possibly be that there is no other? That the sensation you have in your being is the same sensation that everyone has in their being? If so, it must mean that in billions of different bodies all over the earth there is only the one being. Could that then be the divine being? This is a wonderful mystery that everyone sooner or later has to solve. The point at which this quest becomes the abiding passion and interest is where the spiritual life, or the way, begins in real earnest, and all other forms of self-expression, or art, then become subordinate or incidental to the search for this truth. The distinction of substance, substantial, and substantive. The substantiality of the body is where my teaching begins. I take people into that substantiality. I call it the psyche, which everybody knows as the feeling of themselves, towards the knowledge of what I, and you, call me. Yet me is not substantial. It is substantive. It is not substantial because the substantial is of the outer senses. I say me is substantive because it is the ground of the inner sense. The substantive lies behind the substantial. When you use your inner sense, you are using what people would call your mind, or you could call it the perception or the attention. That is the inner sense. Now it doesn't touch things as our hands do. It senses in a substantive way, not a substantial way. Anger, for instance, cannot be touched by the hands, but it can be perceived by the inner sense as something grainy, a disturbing feeling. That feeling is substantive, not substantial. Why don't you call it a substance? Because substance is that which can be measured or weighed, and which can be touched. There is a real distinction here. The substantive is a distinction of substance related to mind or perception. Let's take anger. It is actually a substantive feeling originating from an event in the external world perceived by the outer senses. The outer senses are, let's say, 5 in number, and we are able to see, hear, and taste all at the one time. But inner sense is one sense at one time, and the reality of inner sense is that can only be one thing at a time. Anger, therefore, is not real, because I can have the feeling of anger in me, and at the same time still know that the anger is not me. I have a deeper sense of me, which is not the anger. In the beginning, before I learn through the spiritual life to separate from my anger, I will think that I am the anger. I will say I'm angry, and that will be true. But as I refine the inner sense, I become aware that it is not me, although it's there. There is the duality of anger and me. But I know that the reality perceiving the separation is me. So then, when I have got rid of my anger, I begin to feel the very fine consciousness that we know as well-being, something that is always there. The reality of life is that which is always here. Reality is not where the scientist looks for it. In the scientist's world, the only reality that is demonstrable all the time is the fact that everything is always changing and nothing is ever the same. The inner reality is the perception that is always here. The thing that has the knowledge of my well-being is always there. And that is the reality of my existence. So you have to go through the substance to reach the substantive, the reality of me. And in that is the cessation of attachment to the objects of sense. For anger is demonstrably an attachment to some object of sense. I am angry about something that I can define, measure, weigh, or describe. My substantive reality, me, cannot be described except to say it is well-being, stillness. It is at rest, and always here behind everything substantial. Ego, the popular misconception. Ask most people what ego means, and they'll probably say the word is used to describe a selfish, self-centered, arrogant person. Thus, egotist, egomania, and the well-worn ego trip. But that's not the ego at all. That's the troublesome self. The ego is the most impersonal, unconscious, and essential function in the human body. Through ignorance, the self has succeeded once more in deflecting attention from itself, this time on a popular worldwide basis. There is no I in the selfless ego. The ego is the body's pure intelligence, and as such it has another name recognizable as being selfless in everybody's own experience. The name is instinct. Instinct and ego are identical, the pure intelligence in every living thing. The function of instinct is to protect the body from injury and to ensure its survival as much as that is possible. It does this in every animal, plant, insect, and bacteria, without distinction or consideration. Ego rules in all for good. Thank God. Planning and thinking. We use the word thinking to describe a mental process that has two distinct functions. One is thinking as a form of dreaming. The other we use when we make plans or look to see what the situation is. The difference between planning and thinking is that when we plan, we use only facts, and always with the intention at that moment of translating them into action. Action is the reality. We all know it is a world of facts which will mercilessly crush anyone who acts on airy-fairy notions and impressions. Realizing this, whenever we have anything important to do, we look at the situation and take action. And when we want to escape into waking sleep, which includes worry, we think, or exchange dreams in talking. I am not saying it is wrong to think or have discussions. There is no right or wrong in this, only finding the fact. Right and wrong, like good and bad, are judgments based on conditioned attitudes. If you have no attitude to what you are doing, when you look at a situation you see only the fact. Distinction between pain and suffering. If you have an emotional pain in your stomach or your chest, for instance, then that is a fact. It is there. Pain is. And you must not try to deny it. Nevertheless, pain does not mean that you are suffering. Suffering only arises when you attach or identify with the pain. Most people suffer when they feel emotional pain. They do this because our society, personified by our own brain, is too coarse and unrefined to see the distinction, to see that pain is not suffering. It requires you first of all to hear that there is a distinction, and second that you look inside yourself and demonstrate or prove the point by your own self-experience or self-knowledge. You are the surgeon and the patient. You must see that there is pain in the patient, but you must also see that there is no suffering in the surgeon. The surgeon's role is to separate the pain from the patient. And to do that, the surgeon must not identify with the pain patient, or he will become ineffective. He will suffer. And a suffering surgeon will never do the job. He'll just cause more suffering and more pain. When you can feel emotional pain in your body, acknowledge that pain is. But see and acknowledge, I am not suffering. Acknowledge that over and over while not denying the pain. Then in your clarity, you will be able to perceive the cause of the pain and take some practical action to deal with it. But not before you have stopped suffering. Suffering will always distort your consciousness and your perception of the situation. Your divine consciousness is of such a quality that it will eventually sever you from suffering. Distinction between place and position. When I am in my place, I have no problem. I am in context with my environment and my circumstances. As soon as I take a position, I am out of my place, and soon I have problems, become frustrated, competitive, and unhappy. I am always endeavoring to put people in their place. As we know, very few people in the Western world will tolerate anyone saying, I want to put you in your place. But as everything is the reverse of the truth in the Western world, that's understandable. Nobody wants to be in their place because the Western world's force and willfulness arises from having a position. To be put in your place, you have to give up your position, and that is very painful to the person, the entity that always takes a position. When you give up your position and surrender the willfulness of it, you discover that you're then already in your place. Your place is where God or life put you in the beginning, when you had no position. You are then free. The East and the West. The East is the master, the living truth in man and woman. The West is the know-all that rubbishes it. East and West are poles apart in the human psyche. The East ends and the West begins in you, in your discontent and avoidance of the truth. God, like life and truth, is east of questions, of ignorance, of knowing and not knowing, east of Eden. Now you must cross from west to east, which is to go back through yourself into the reality of being. Going back east, there is suffering. The order of suffering is from the horrible, to the terrible, to the awful. To the westernized brain, this is appalling, an ever-increasing pressure of suffering. But seen from the east, it is the reverse, a diminishing. What is awful is the moment of truth, the moment of God. For God alone is awful. In the West, man and woman run from the awful truth. Yet facing it is the only solution to what is horrible and terrible. The never-ending discontent and the lack of fulfillment of every westernized man and woman. Cross the brain-made desert you must. There is no other way. It is your way, because you made it when you went west. Now you must retrace your steps, leaving behind all you have gathered, all your attachments. All you will retain for the journey is your love and your experience. Everything else is useless baggage and will only hamper you on the extraordinary crossing. By stilling the condition, it becomes the state. What you are doing by being still is taking the condition out of life. The condition is what the world puts on you as, this is important. It's important that we win the war. It's important that you know what the price of gold is. It's important to buy the children a birthday present. All that is important. That's the condition we live in. By being still, we say, look, I don't want to change the condition. I just want to change myself. So we become stiller within the condition. You know the difference between a condition and a state? You probably never thought of it because people don't think too much about these distinctions. The whole world consists of condition. The beauty, the love, the wonder that you are, is a state. As you become still within the condition, you enter the state. That state doesn't end. A state is always there. Beautiful. A condition is up and down. It's good today, bad tomorrow. They did me a good turn yesterday. Today they just stole the milk from me. They loved me yesterday. I thought they loved me today. And they don't. They just said they never want to see me again. Good one day, down the next. This is condition. So what are you doing? You're putting your stillness into the condition, making the condition stiller. If you continue to make the condition in yourself stiller and stiller, it becomes the state. Because the condition only arose out of the state. It arose as I told you. In the beginning of time we were in this state and it was wondrous. We started to bring condition in by looking down, taking thought. We put the condition of thought in the state of being. And, having thought once, we had to think again. and the conditions started to arise. The unstillness. Action is always that which makes things pure. If you've got an idea and you are not prepared to try it out and see if it works, then you're soon thinking, you're in dreamland. But if you're moved to act, I'm going to do it. It can be done this way. The idea will be purified of thought. Action is the purest thing in the world, because action is always now.